All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth live airing of Conversations with Cal, a series by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. We're really excited to have you all here today, and thank you so much for attending. My name is Gabriella, and I'm a small business specialist here in the Ed Osdaboo. I want to make a few comments before I introduce my boss, who will be introducing our guest today. Firstly, you will notice that if you're not a presenter for this event, both your microphone and camera are muted and cannot be unmuted unless done so by me. Conversations with Cal will be recorded and uploaded to our website. In the interest of time, there will be no question and answer session. However, we do still want your feedback. If you have any suggestions about topics you'd like to hear more about, specific questions you'd like answered in a future session, or individuals you'd like to hear from as a small business, shoot us an email at small.business@ed.gov, and we'll be happy to consider your whatever content you have suggested for this series. Please do keep in mind that all iterations of this series will be interview-based in nature. You may submit questions through the chat during the event, but we may or may not present them based on timing and flow. Questions not answered today may be answered in a follow-up event. Now that you have a better understanding of how this project will run, let's begin. I'd like to introduce you all to my boss, Mr. Calvin Mitchell Jr. Take it away, Cal.
Good afternoon. So I heard that it's super awesome outside. But you know what? It's going to be super awesome right here because we are kicking off another Convo with Cal. So you might be saying, what the heck is Convo with Cal? I know as Department of Education, I just signed up. So let me tell you a little bit of what it is. This is a different type of dynamic. This is a little bit of I'll call it innovation. We're just trying to figure out ways to engage our small businesses in a more meaningful way. Typically, I'm able to provide some insight on contracting and provide some insight on Department of Education. However, sometimes I can't give you those nuts and bolts, right? How do you market to the federal government? How do you win capture deals? What is your strategy? How do people get successful in this federal contracting arena? So what I really wanted to do was develop this podcast style platform where I got a small business that's been successful in this marketplace and talk to them about, hey, how did you get successful? If you're familiar with National Public Radio, they have Guy Raz, and he does this show called How I Built This. And he talks to CEOs and innovators in the industry and really understands how they built their empire, right? So the guy from Squarespace, all the cool people who are doing all the techie cool stuff, that's who he's interviewing. So what I wanted to do is bring something similar. If you're a small business just starting out, if you've been in the business for a little bit, why not learn from someone who's been successful, who's been around in this federal contracting space? And that's how we got Mr. Jeff Wynn. Jeff, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Calvin. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so I got to do an intro because they're probably like, who the heck is Jeff Wynn?
Yes, sir.
So Jeff Wynn is the owner, president, and chief executive officer of Sierra Management and Technologies. Jeff has had this distinct pleasure of opening more than one business. So Sierra has had a 26-year history in delivering mission critical services to DoD agencies, primarily with a focus on software engineering, application and development, and logistics. So in 2004, Jeff actually founded and became the president of Blue Beacon Consulting. Right, so we got Blue Beacon and we got Sierra Management, a small disadvantaged business supporting federal civilian agencies. So Jeff is a native Washingtonian. So he was one of the first Black quarterback at Gonzaga College High School. And if you know Gonzaga here in the DC area, they're always a perennial powerhouse in the Washington, DC area, really in all sports, but particularly football for sure. He's a proud son of parents who were lifelong federal government workers, civilian employees. So we thank you for your parent service. I know we talked a lot in the first conversations with Cal about your parents and how influential your parents were. And it was really special to hear how they were really your rock and how it kept you grounded in developing your business. But also, there was some trepidation in the beginning, right? Because they got these awesome government jobs and wondered why in the world you would go and start your own small business.
Very
So, so if you missed that first one, you missed the discussion. But we might be able to gloss over it. So, but Jeff does more than just on the job, right? And building his businesses. Over the years, he's been really active in mentoring, including Vistage, a CEO mentoring and peer advisory group. And I know he also has been he also was a co-founder of a mentoring group, Think Tank, to mentor CEOs of small businesses from various industry. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree in business management and a minor in computer science from the mighty Rutgers University. Go Scarlet Knights.
Not so mighty anymore, but yes.
The football team, I don't know what's going on with them, man. They were really killing it at one time, but I think they got Greg Schiano back, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The basketball team looked good the last time I looked, so there's hope. Is there any details that I missed? I just really appreciated our first conversation. Jeff is a father. He's a family man. He's a person who puts family first, and he talked so much about that. And he also talked about how he gave back in the first conversations with Cal. And so traditionally, what we do is we do a part one and a part two. Just to kind of capture, because sometimes there's some follow-up questions that we don't get to because we don't kind of allow questions. But so we had these follow-up opportunities. Jeff, is there anything you want to say before we get started? First, thank you.
No, thank you. I was just going to welcome everyone to the podcast with Calvin, Conversation with Cal. The only thing I'll add for those folks that wasn't part of my kind of my bio there was my first company, Blue Beacon Consulting, was a graduated 8A out of the SBA program. So I went through the full 9 years of the program. We also were a STARS 2 Prime for both the base 5-year period and then the option 5-year period for STARS 2. So certainly going through the 8A route, Calvin, was something that I'm very familiar with, in addition now to being a small business in a full and open space. So that's the only thing I'll add.
Yeah, and that's good. And I think we talked last time because people are always wondering, okay, well, how do I start and how do I get established? And what are some good ways to start? And I think you talked a lot about how the 8A program was very integral in really launching your business and really getting you into the federal marketplace.
Yes, sir. For me, Calvin, I look at the 8A program as kind of an incubator program, a investment type of program. You shouldn't join the 8A program when you're too early in your professional career in starting your business, where you're just trying to find out what your market statement is, what your mission statement is, what your message is, what's your value proposition to your client base. How do you differentiate yourself in the marketplace? If you're figuring that out, get a couple clients under your belt, get a couple wins under your belt, go through the contracting process, even as a subcontractor in a mentor-protege agreement or something like that, because those 9 years in the SBA program go very quickly. So for me, I looked at it as, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to use this 9 years to build a business that I'm going to use to then build other business from, which is what I did. The SBA program is very good in terms of marketing. It gives you a license to hunt. It's not going to do the job for you. You have to build your own relationships. You have to make your own business decisions. You have to go find your own clients. And so for me, using that to say, okay, I have a license to hunt, and now I have a streamlined acquisition process for my clients to get to me outside of my other small business competition was one of the ways I use the SBA program to get ahead.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I like what you said, because the 8A program really is, in my mind, that same kind of an incubator, right? A lot of times we use the 8A from the advantage of the federal government sometimes I think we use it more of a convenience and we're not really strategic about it. I know when I'm consulting with our contracting officers and the program offices, I'm talking about, hey, what is your long-term goal and how we can keep these requirements in the 8A program, but be able to backfill, right? And be able to come in and give other small businesses the opportunity, because what generally happens is, hey, this great 8A comes in and they do work with us, they get some experience with us, right? And then they graduate and are no longer able to compete on that existing requirement.
Right.
But now they've built the capabilities to understand the department and they're able to go and do other things. And they may be a small disadvantaged business, or they may be a veteran-owned small business. They may be they may be somewhere else in this social economic program. And now we've just cultivated that next prime contractor, right? Because we gave them we built them. That we kind of gave them some work to understand past performance, so on and so forth, and now they're really able to compete on our other contracts that we can provide set aside. So it's funny, when I took the role, I was telling everybody about this whole idea of this life cycle, and I love how you just kind of put it into place, because that's what it really is, right? It's a life cycle. It's an opportunity for you to build these relationships, to cultivate this past performance. And once you get past performance, how significant is that, right? Once you get the past performance, it's really that accelerator that really kind of moves you.
You know, it's interesting very much, Calvin, that I think people take for granted, past performance. You have a 3-year window on some contracts, and most contracts maybe a 5-year window of which to speak about past performance. So again, you don't want to be too early in the process and come up with past performance and not be able to leverage it. Things roll off very quickly. So in a 9-year program, you think you have 9 years, but those first 1 to 2 years go very quickly, especially as a small business. Typically, as a CEO, you're doing a lot of work. You might be billable yourself. You're probably, balancing family obligations, whether, aging parents, elderly parents, or young kids and so forth. Like I was doing both. And if those first 2 years, you're figuring out what your company is, you're trying to figure out who we are in the marketplace, what do we sell, how do we differentiate ourselves, how do we make even deliverables, how do we execute, how do we do operationalized stuff, then those first 2 years go by quickly, and then you win your first contract. Now all of a sudden you got 5 years to really talk about it. Now you're year 5 or year 6 of the SBA program, and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? I got 3 years before I graduated, and now the SBA is starting to put on different revenue mixes based on 8A, non-8A, and so forth. And so it becomes troublesome. So for me, looking at the 8A program as an incubator, I love that word you said, where you pretty much have your business model down. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to go to market perfect, but just go to market with a sense of who you are, who your clients are, who your target customer might be, the profile of that customer, how you would execute on a contract, and just start winning contracts, best way you can, so that then when you get to the 8A program, it can accelerate that. You don't want to accelerate from 0 to 100. That's a big push up the mountain. You want to go from 100 to 1,000 real quick.
Yeah, it's funny because you think, I think a lot of small businesses kind of think that that's kind of how it goes, right? The Drake song, go 0 to 100 real quick, right? Yeah, exactly. But that's not really how it happens, right? And I think it's important for everyone to know what strategic growth looks like, which is really what you're explaining, right? You're growing with some intentionality, and even entering the 8A program, there's some intentional steps that you need to take, because you just don't want to just jump right out there, right? Hey, I'm a brand new business. I'm ready to start getting contracts, and you're still trying to figure yourself out. You haven't built that. I like that, Javette, building that brand, right? You haven't established yourself. So, I mean, that's a really good point. So let me switch gears a little bit. We're at this point now where we're in the first quarter, right? The fourth quarter deluge of contracts are over. What are you doing now as a small business owner? How does your business typically pursue contracts this type of year, or are you spending more time developing RFI? What are you doing at this time? And I know it's a continuing resolution right now. Can you talk about how that kind of impacts things?
Oh, sure. Interesting enough, Calvin, I go about it in kind of a multi-pronged attack. For me, I always say I have to be ready because I never know when the government is going to say, okay, Jeff, we're ready for you now. I can't dictate the timing, so I have to be reactive to the timing. So for me, I do multiple prong attack. We're doing customer outreach programs where now the pressure is off because it's brand new fiscal year, right? Now people are a little bit more in festive spirits because they are Christmas spirit and so forth. People are coming to the office, even with COVID and so forth. So going out and doing these market research, marketing campaigns, building relationships, introducing ourselves, or reestablishing who we are. Say, hey, it's been a while since we talked. It's been a while since we last connected because of COVID. Hey, here we are again. So kind of the marketing outreach campaigns, but it's always with a target mind. I educate myself with my business development team on what are the long range forecasts? What are the forecasts of those respective agencies? That way we can have very targeted conversations. Relationships without a targeted outcome or a next step to pursue the next meeting, so forth, you're not really doing a business. It's a feel-good meeting. It's one of those meetings where you check the box. Yeah, I met with the CEO or the contracting officer of XYZ agency. But if you're not really pushing the needle for an agenda, even just moving it down to even the next win could be, okay, sir, this is a great follow-up. Could I meet you back in 90 days or 60 days? Or could I bring you back a white paper with this type of information that seems to be of value to your group? Try to find a way to advance the ball. So marketing outreach, campaign outreach is the first thing. RFIs, small businesses like yourself, like myself, need to respond to all the outreach that people like you and your departments do, Calvin. You guys are looking for messaging in the small business world to prove to your peers, prove to your customers internally that there's a small business capability out there. So I want to make sure that even though there's no money in it today for me, that I'm showing through the RFI process that we can compete. And here's the thing. The more Blue Beacon, my first company, or Sierra Management Technologies, the more you guys see in RFIs, my logo, my brand, my information coming up, my capabilities, then when the RFP comes out, hopefully we're a known entity. We're not a stranger. Hopefully we might have got some intelligence from you guys in terms of back and forth and say, okay, here's the RFI. Then you guys ask questions. Okay, Mr. Wynn, we love the RFI you gave us around agile development or AI or robotics or software development, application development. We have some following questions. Now we have a dialogue, right? That's what's important. Just establishing a dialogue. That's how relationships are built, right? Over time. So marketing, campaign outreach, RFI process, and then RFPs. Try to be very responsive when the RFPs are due to make sure that we are getting ourselves at bat. Because now that I'm a full and open business, which I've been for the past, 3 years, we need to be responsive to the RFP process because I can no longer shape the timing or the objectives of statements of work through relationships like I could do in the 8A process.
Wow, that's so many good nuggets. And I really have to. I see my team is picked up on that RFI. The request for information or the sources sought. If we're not responding to those, if small businesses, if you're not responding, I lose my ability to do the advocacy, right?
Exactly. Yes.
It's almost like I have to have some pieces there to build something, right?
Correct.
And if our market research comes back that there's not enough interest, then they're going to end up going unrestricted, right? And then you got to compete with everybody. Right. And if we are able to really respond to those RFIs, and I know I get it. Sometimes these RFIs are like mini proposals, and I've been pushing back on that. And I tell people all the time, hey, send me an email, right? If something looks cumbersome, if something looks a little cray-cray, let me know, right? I have no problem like refining that because our contracting people are really reasonable and they're good people and they're smart people, and so we just got to have that dialogue.
And also, Calvin, if you look at every relationship, right? So, you put together a diagram, an org chart, if you will, at the agency level. Okay, here's Department of Ed here. Here's Department of Agriculture here. Here's IRS and so forth, some of the federal agencies, or do it on the defense side. And you say, how many sources sought has Sierra Technologies responded to? And who have been our POCs, our point of contacts? Over the next 6 or 8 months, we say, okay, we've done a couple of sources sought. We've done a couple of RFPs. We've done a couple of marketing outreach. Okay, now Department of Ed is starting to know who we are. And so then when the RFP comes out, hopefully you should never respond to an RFP totally blind without what we call customer intelligence, customer knowledge. You don't want to just do a blanket thing, because the people that are evaluating your proposals, they know and they're looking, and you're believing there's some serious competition out there in the small business world, and they have customer intelligence. So if you are trying to recommend a very bland or generic solution, you'll quickly get to the bottom of the evaluation stack. And so if you think about that org chart, say, here's Department of Ed. In the last 6 to 9 months, I've done several RFIs. I've got several sources sought. I've been to a outreach day by the department. I've done some market research where they know me on a personal level, so forth. Again, I'm just a name with everyone else, but now there's a story that starts to be woven in. And by the time I get to the RFP, now I can say, hey, I met with your CIO. I met with your program manager over at FSA or Big Ed. I understand some of the data challenges. I also looked at your long-range forecast, and I also looked at when your administrator gave a presentation to Congress. I know some of the burdens and priorities of your department, and now try to find ways to interweave that knowledge into your RFP. Now all of a sudden you have something there in addition to your technical solution to show you have knowledge and familiarity. So all that stuff, yes, it could be a little burdensome in terms of RFIs and source of salt. But if you use it strategically, always to build a brand and to do what? To get knowledge, the interaction, the dialogue, there's going to be a payoff later on.
Yeah, and I like, again, more good knowledge there. So I find it fascinating because I always say the most well-prepared companies are the easiest to work with. Those who have looked at the forecast or know what contracts are expiring, right, and have done that market intelligence to say, hey, Calvin, I just need you to get me in front of this person, right? Or I got this solution. Here's something else that's pretty interesting in terms of you were in your discussion, you were talking about being strategic with your relationships. So there was a small business that came to me, and she was giving me her capabilities, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, well, we don't really do that, right? I haven't heard a requirement for that. And so it was interesting because she said, hey, can I have a follow-up? And, I'm like, okay, sure, we'll do a follow-up. So we had this follow-up meeting. And again, she gave me the pitch, and I'm kind of like, we really don't do that.
Right.
And here's what's interesting. So later, I'll say maybe several weeks, right, had passed. And then I'm sitting in a meeting, and my boss brings up the exact same capability that I didn't think we had for the Department of Education.
Okay.
I reached back out to that small business. I said, hey, do you do this? Yeah, of course. And now we're going to be able to facilitate a meeting, right?
Yeah.
But it all goes back to what you're saying, right? So I'm not sure how she came to education, right? But if you're listening to, testimonies on the Hill, or if you're looking and you can tell that there's a capability gap where you can fill, and just being prepared and saying, hey, I know what contracts they got. I know what types of contracts they use. Hey, if you're an 8A, and hey, what expiring contracts does the Department of Education have? Right. I'm telling you, that's very highly effective. If you can come to me and say, hey, Calvin, I know you got these contracts expiring, and these contracts are 8A. I know you're going to keep it in the 8A program. I even have relationships with the incumbent.
Yeah.
I mean, Those things are slam dunks, right? But what you're talking about is really fortifying those relationships, doing that market research, and target relationships, right? And looking at that long range forecast to establish relationships, to really build the business. Yeah,
really. And with that, Calvin, right? I focus on a small business from the full and open perspective. Add the small business 8A program, whether again woman-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, so forth. Now you have that on steroids. It starts with relationships. It starts with knowledge, and it's like me telling my kids, and what I learned the hard way when I was at Gonzaga. There was always, everyone had their favorite subjects, but to each teacher, the guy that decided to major in religion, the guy that decided to major in history or mathematics, to them, that subject was the most important thing that they wanted to build their life around, their passions around. And so for you to go into history class and be like, I got an A in math, history, I don't have to worry about it, and expect that teacher to give you the respect that you're not giving them, well, it's not a two-way street, right? You're not doing that. So if I'm going to have the nerve to call up a Calvin at the Department of Ed and talk to you for 30 minutes, I need to show you that I've done my homework, that I'm not asking you to do something I haven't already done myself. I've got to show you that I've done my homework, I'm carrying my water, and my ask of you is not something that's Herculean. My ask of you, especially because you're playing in a government sector where you have to kind of be an equal player to all players, my ask of you needs to be very targeted and says, hey, put me in touch with Mr. So-and-so, who I understand is running this data warehousing thing, or who's responsible for this RFP that's coming out in 6 months and can talk to us now. Put me in touch with the person that's the incumbent because they're graduating 8A. I'm in 8A, and maybe I can give them 50% of the business and find a way to transition some of their incumbent staff in to the benefit of the agency and the benefit of the company, but gives me as a new small business, as an 8A, that leg up, right? So it's got to be targeted in those messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's good advice too, because the first quarter is kind of squirrely, right? There's a lot going on, and there's a lot that can be done. And so how do you decide which contracts to chase? Like, how you call that capture, right? How do you do that? What are some factors that you consider when pursuing new opportunities?
For me, Calvin, again, it all starts with relationships. There's some fierce competition out there, and if you go on a search for, a small business in the Schedule 70 world with GSA, or you pick any schedule out there with a MOBIS schedule or some of the other schedules out there. If you just do a regular, search on agile development, small business government contractors, you could pull up 100 or 1,000 people. There is competition out there. So for me, I don't just go after blind technology plays. Yes, I might have a good story to tell, but I need to have that customer intel. And if I haven't done any homework on it, so if it's a brand new agency, what I'll do is I'll tell you what, okay, do my homework, find out what this new agency is about. Find this new agency seems to be very good in terms of their 8A program, their outreach programs to businesses and so forth, that they are very high on their small business quotas. To me, that means that they have a small business appreciation. I'm not trying to convert or change their culture. So for me, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, here's a brand new agency that I have no relationships with. Let me spend some time in an accelerated fashion to get that type of intel. Or if I have a unique technology play, then what I'll do is I'll try to look on some of the USA spending.gov type thing, or Fed BizOps, Beta SAM, so forth, to say, okay, here's a company that plays in this space. Maybe they know the Department of Ed very well. I'm trying to get in the Department of Ed, but they don't do a technology play. They do financial management. They do program management. I'll reach out to that CEO of small business and say, look, you have the customer intel. You've worked in and around systems and or departments. I have the technology play. Let's work together and put this together. So there's some benefit there. But again, if you're just going after blind proposals for a technology play, again, how are you going to be able to solve their unique problem? And again, you're trying to be a trusted advisor, a trusted partner for later. Like I said, if you're doing a big, that's fine. But small business, you get the CEO, you get the chief technology officer, the CIO. If one of my programs, my contracts have a problem, I'm solving it and my CIO is solving with me. You're getting the whole team up the whole chain. And so it starts with relationships. And even if it's a new contract, a new relationship, otherwise I don't go blind fishing.
Good. I like that. Blind fishing. You don't want to fish blind, right?
Yes, sir. Hey, you know what? You got what? I'm not a fisher, so I'm going to butcher this analogy. But if you have some saltwater bait and you're in a freshwater pond, you're going to be there a long time.
And going back to the teacher thing and the special subjects, I guess that's why I never got love for my teachers, because my favorite subject was gym and lunch. So
yeah, there you go. Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, I remember a quick story. My father, we had Gonzaga. My brother was getting straight A's in all his classes and was like getting a C in a religion class. And my father was at a PTA, and he was like, "Oh, Kevin's doing this, Kevin's doing that." And then the religion teacher said, "Well, he's not doing so good in my class." And my father's like, "Well, he's doing well in all the important classes." My mom hit my father so quickly, said he didn't know what he's talking about, so you can't tell that to a priest at Gonzaga. So
it's always mom that has the common sense, right?
Sometimes absolutely
talking, right?
Absolutely.
So let me ask you: is it always based on relationships? Is it always based on profitability, or is there some strategic play there?
Very good question, Calvin. When you're a small business, you got to build past performance. Past performance is the key. In almost every proposal that I can't think of actually one now, there are 3 evaluation criteria. There is your technical expertise of your company. It might be the key resumes of the people you bring. There's pricing. So it's technical, pricing, and past performance. If you don't have past performance, which you can't buy, you can't just create that overnight. You have to do that through hard work, delivery, and execution of your project. So for me, if I could make a dime, just pay the rent. I don't have to make a profit. Even if it's sometimes there's a lost leader, type of thing. They say kind of get your nose under the tent type of thing to build relationships. If it's a strategic play that gives you the past performance, you are either a prime or you're a subcontractor that is a named subcontractor, so you can get CPARs, right? You get the ratings for CPARs. Then I say go for it because it keeps your people busy. And even if you don't make a dime, but you pay your costs, right? Because small business cash flow is king, right? And so for me, as long as I'm paying my simple costs, which means I can price very aggressively for a strategic play, get in the door, get the knowledge, build my teams and my execution skills as a small business, get some at bats, if you say, right? Get some confidence in who we are, get our brand, get our identity. And I tell you what, I could walk into your office once every quarter as a sales guy if you're my program manager, and you'll give me a good conversation like you gave that woman on that special type of feature. If you are my customer and I'm talking to you once a week on status reporting, and I'm working with you in the trenches on why this database didn't work or why this data didn't sync up or why these reports are wrong, and then I come to you and say 6 months in, hey Calvin, Mr. Program Officer, I've worked with you on solving these problems. I do now know that you have these other problems. Let me tell you how I can solve them. Let me tell you how we've solved them for other companies, commercial or government. Here's a white paper on that. Here's some free kind of suggestions that we would love to present to you on how to solve your problem. We're already a known commodity now. So again, building those relationships and being inside the tent gives you an opportunity to grow and sell in a consultative sales model. You're educating your customer. You're not just a sales guy trying to knock on the door, type of thing. You're on mute. Oh.
Man, you missed all the good stuff. No,
yeah, there you go.
I remember back in like 2000, I guess it was 2008, 2009, I was doing construction contracting, and the one particular military base in the DMV area, we had some guys doing like some restoration on some buildings, and one of the general officers had came over to our the construction trailer, and they were like, "Hey, we got this big issue. We got we got to get somebody in there. There's water shooting up in the middle of the field, right?" And we look out and we're like, "Yeah, it's like a geyser, right?
Yeah,
it's just water shooting up." And they're like, "What are we gonna do? You guys got to get somebody over here now, right?" And I'm like, you know how long it takes me to put a contract in place, right? It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So through they were like, so the guy, the contractor, the prime contractor that was working on the project there on the base, he just happened to walk up and say, "Hey, I'm assuming you guys don't have a new water feature. What's happening?"
Yeah.
Right. And he's like, "Hey, I could probably get some guys over here, right? Like in a few hours or so, and get that straightened out." Right. And it's amazing because we were able to do a letter contract, and we had some flexibilities, to do some of those things. So, but it's always about those relationships, right? And
that's correct.
That if we didn't trust that contractor to do the work, he wouldn't get the work, right?
Exactly.
But sometimes that's how the relationships really matter. Here's something else I want to talk to you about. I know a lot of times there's a lot of discussion around subcontracting. And I hear some subcontracting horror stories, and I hear some great subcontracting horror stories. So, from your perspective as a government contractor, what are your thoughts on subcontracting, and what are your thoughts on what is your point of view as being a subcontractor and as being a prime? What are some things that you can probably share for someone who might be newer, or maybe someone who's looking to subcontract in other opportunities?
Right. A couple of things. So as an 8A program, through the 8A program for 9 years, and also as a Stars 2 Prime for another 10 years, I had the luxury of Blue Beacon Consulting being a prime contractors, which meant that all we did was subs because it was 8A set aside work. So we had tons of subcontractor work. What I would say that first and foremost is make sure your contracts or your statements of work are tight. Make sure that sets your expectations in terms of you don't need to make it too big or too laborious. You don't need to make sure that it covers every contractual language or relationship discussion, but make sure that you're detailing out the level of work, the level of resource. If you're looking for a senior analyst, then don't let them send you a junior analyst. If you're looking for a junior analyst, don't let them send you a senior analyst if you can't pay for it, type of thing. Tell them the bill rate. Tell them what certain procedures are to go outside above, for new work or for chain of command control, things like that nature, for decision making. Make sure your contracts, your subcontracts, your teaming agreements protect you as a prime, but also explicitly point out what is the work that's supposed to be done and so forth, so that there's no misunderstanding. So at least there's some expectations being set. You're right. At the end of the day, Calvin, it's about relationships too there. I try to work with people I trust. I try to have relationships. As a small business, I used to go try to talk to the CEO. I don't care if that small business was a $5 million CEO or the CEO of a $15 or $30 million company. If he couldn't find 10 minutes to talk to me when I'm bringing him work, I try to stay away from those kind of guys, because I need to have a relationship with someone at the top that looks at me in the eye, sits across from the desk and says, okay, Jeff, I don't know you, but you're bringing us some good work here. And or we found out that your client and our client recommended you for an RFP that we're bidding on, and we want you to be part of the team, right? And so as long as there's some mutual kind of ground there, and I can have a chance to meet with CEO or a senior vice president somewhere in the management chain that owns that vertical of where I'm trying to play as a subcontractor, at the end of the day, you gotta trust. But in the negotiation process of teaming agreements, of subcontracting agreements, of capture plans, usually you can get a good sense for what those people are going to be. If they are beating you down, if they're not being as inclusive in terms of transparency, if they're not sharing customer information when they have a meeting on Monday and you have a meeting on Tuesday, then be leery, right? Because that's not a good partner probably in the long run. However, if you have people that are transparent, so for me, in terms of my own beliefs, I have 15 minutes to make a first impression with a client. I'm not going to go to a client and say, oh, you know what? I have the perfect partner with me, and could I come back later and have another conversation? I bring my subs in early and often, and together we show why we as a team, they should look at the Sierra X company when that RFP hits their desk. We want to make sure that we have a chance. If I can bring the smart guy in who's on a subcontractor, I don't need to bring in another CEO with me. There's too many of us around, right? What I need to say, just bring in your solution architect, bring in your chief designer, bring in your chief program officer or whatever that knows the agency that we're trying to solve, and let's solve some problems. Let's roll up our sleeves and have that conversation. So again, be careful with subcontracting. Don't go in there, with kind of just with a wish, right? As Obama says, hope is not a strategy. Even if you are the sub and you're getting prime contract to talk to you, make sure that subcontractor that you receive, when do you get paid? How do you get paid? What's your deliverables to them? Who makes the approval of those deliverables? What is the timing of those deliverables reviews and so forth? If the client doesn't pay the prime, do you still get paid? Because again, as a small business, you got to make sure about cash flow. So you got to make sure that you keep all those things tight in terms of the subcontractor relationship and in the language that you have. And then again, at the end of the day, you just got to execute. You got to find ways to execute, whether strategic, long-term play because you're fighting for CPARs and past performance long-term, and you're not making a lot of money, or it's something that's fairly profitable that you can then use to then build other resources for your next project that you're going after.
Yeah, and so how do you build those relationships with those other companies? How do you do that?
Calvin, I go to a lot of Chamber of Commerce events. I go to a lot. When I go to events, when like say Department of Ed has a customer outreach program, you know what? I'll actually meet with some of the people, other attendees out there to see what they do. Now I've been at this since 2004, October 2004, so I have a very good Rolodex of people. I got a couple of Rolodexes of folks, of people that I'm not going to do business with. I'll tell you that, But I also have a lot more folks that they're honest, they're trying to do work, they're happy. I bring them along and so forth. And so for me, trying to make sure that I have that network of people that either do what I do but do it bigger, right, or don't do what I do. And so that way it's a kind of there's no competition when we bring them on board. Or I have relationships where they have excellent relationships. So for instance, there's a woman I know that does a lot of great work in terms of classroom training and curriculum building at a federal agency. She's never going to be my competition, but she's got a 15, 18-year history at this agency, and she knows where a lot of relationships are. And some of the IT curriculum of which she creates are some of the people that would be my target profile of a customer I would go after. So I work with her to say, okay, look, you provide the customer intel, I'll give you a commission as if you're a BD person. If there's not one person of your team on there because you and I are so vastly different, or I'll give you some past performance on the training aspect of the new software solution, my application that my guys create, and let you handle that piece of it so that you can do use case, maybe requirements. Let's put your knowledge to use so I can write you into the proposal process type of thing. So certainly for me, trying to find ways to build those relationships at every avenue, whether it's a Black Chamber of Commerce. I like to go to a lot of those, the customer outreach programs that like Department of Ed and other agencies have, or other small business type of get-togethers, workshops. And also, for a while there, again, COVID kind of put a monkey wrench on a lot of things, but sometimes there might be different meetups, agile development meetup groups, or Six Sigma meetup groups and things like that. So I would certainly send one of my guys to go just to attend some of those things so we can meet some folks also.
Yeah, so things have been opening up a little bit. So I went to the federal government is looking at ways to reduce barriers for small disadvantaged businesses. So I've been trying to do a lot more outreach to some of the minority small business groups, right? So I did a session with the Black Chamber of Commerce, and this was one of my first in-person. It was a hybrid event actually. But it was only like 150 people, but there was a lot of discussions that happened there, right? And it reminded me that how much I do miss, right, in terms of those conversations you might have in the passing, or meeting someone who you've only corresponded with through email, and talking about opportunities and things of that nature, because I'll say maybe several weeks before that, I did Celebration, which I think is the most clever thing ever. But it's the Asian Chamber of Commerce. They have their Celebration events, and I spoke there, which was completely virtual. And it was after the event, one of the panelists had said, "Hey, I would love to catch up with you." And I was just thinking, if we were at the event and we were together, we would have chopped it up already, right? So now we got to find time in our busy schedules. But I want to go back a little bit and peel back the onion in terms of this whole concept of small business opportunities. But how do contracting experience is probably the most significant element for small business outside of, I would say, the work, right?
Yes.
Oftentimes, it's kind of like the chicken and egg, right? Because a lot of the contractors are just trying to get that prime contracting experience, right? because in some ways that I would say that's a golden ticket, right? It really
Yes.
starts to really help you in that trajectory.
Right.
So how before you established prime contracting experience, how did you make your business stand out? And what were those capabilities, and what were some things that you did to really get your foot in the door? Because I get this question a lot, and if you could just kind of flesh that out a little bit for those who may be thinking about this question.
Right. You know, Calvin, my early successes were that I wasn't afraid to hire people smarter than me in certain areas. My early successes were due mostly to the fact that I needed to have at least one rock star on my team. And I don't care if I made a nickel on that guy. I don't care if I even lost, but if the overall project team was profitable and I had this smart guy that can figure anything out, that's what I led with. So when you're a small company and you don't have past performance, so when I transitioned from Andersen or from Accenture, and I used to be able to sell the firm, now I'm selling myself.
Right.
And you know, and there are people coming out of high school that have smarter brains that are doing more in their garages and their parents' backyards than I'll ever do in 20 years of work, right? And so, right, so trying to say, I want to bring the best value to my client, and so finding, word of mouth relationships, even job searches, whatever, through recruiting firms, staffing firms. I would try to find whatever the smartest guy was in a particular field that was available and say, even if I have a 40-hour work, give me 20 hours, give me 10. I'll take 10 hours and you be a strategic consultant and you can oversee the strategic direction, the execution of my team. Now I'll have a project manager. I have my own development team in place. If it's IT, if it's project managers, I have my own project managers in place. But I wanted to have someone that was smarter than me in the domain expertise of the contract that I could rely on to say, you know what? Talk to my client. Let that client know that this is the type of resource that Blue Beacon in the past or Sierra Technologies today can deliver. These are the kind of resources that we bring to bear. You don't need to go to IBM or Deloitte to find these type of resources. We have the same resource here in a small business and let this guy shine. And so again, whether it's 30 or 40 hours a week in terms of project work or 5 or 10 hours a week, and they just came for status meetings and testing discussions or problem solving critical path, they would set a strategy on Monday and have the team execute Tuesday through Friday, come back to the next Monday. How do we do, guys? Here's the next game plan going forward, type of thing. Having that smart person, provided the years of expertise that a large business would have. It provided the years of a bench strength of resources that had grown up through a company that I didn't have. So when I was just starting off to differentiate myself, I can't differentiate myself when I only have 1 or 2 past performance under my belt. I can't differentiate myself when I say, it's 2021 December and Jeff was founded in, 2020 or 2019, right? So being able to compete, they are buying people, they're buying expertise. And I want to put front and center my smartest guy, even if I have to 1099 them, just bring them on board, use that resource, get that strength, and then start to get what we're talking about, execution, project wins on our belt, because that guy will then start to train your regular resources, your employees, number one. Number two, he also becomes the face of the domain expertise you're working on, that particular contract. So he's talking apples to apples with the client project manager. If he's a Google guy, if he's a cloud guy, if he's a business intelligence guy, if he's a data analytics guy, and he's talking to the data analytics or the Google or the cloud guy who's sitting across the desk at the client site, they're talking shop and they know the same stuff. And if I got the right guy on my team, he's representing my team, my company, and what we can bring to bear in terms of resources in the best way forward. And that's how I get new work. That's how I differentiate myself. Putting a white paper is a static document that says what someone has done for a particular project. That doesn't mean that is transferable to your project today with today's technologies and today's challenges. So if I bring the guy that I would have had to write that white paper to a project, to a client meeting up front early and say, hey, let's get on the whiteboard. Here's some free consulting. Let's brainstorm what this might look like and so forth. Now I'm getting customer intel. The guy's writing on a board. Here's database X. Here's feeder RSS feed from X, Y, and Z. I'm getting intelligence, but my guy is brainstorming a possible strategy, and we're checking body language. Is the guy saying, yes, yes, we got it? Or is the client saying, no, I'm not really sure, of which we can then add more, right? So we're trying to get that inner loop of information.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I love the most about small business is there's a belly button, right? There's a person that you can contact. They care about every single concern of the customers, right? And that's how you should be, right?
Yes.
As opposed to, some larger companies, we are really a drop in the bucket, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because there's some large companies and that there's some preferences for, I'll say sometimes, and I'd say to the program offices, we're just a drop in the bucket, right? If you're a drop in the bucket, you're not gonna get the best services, right? You're not gonna get the most innovation. You're not gonna get the best prices. You're gonna get that kid that gets picked last for dodgeball, right?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That's what you're gonna get.
Right.
Especially because we don't even we're not doing big dollars in comparison
Right.
to the DHS and some other places.
Correct.
But I got another question. I'm enjoying this conversation so much as I always do. I touched on this a little bit, but I want to touch on it again. We might have some new folks in the audience. Is it really vastly different when you're engaging different agencies? And if so, how should what recommendations would you give to small businesses that are developing their target, trying to figure out who's in their target market from their market research, and they're really trying to figure out who's going to be those primary accounts, right? Who's going to be those strategic accounts, right? And so, is there a vast difference in how they engage? Is there anything that you would give small businesses to really make them more competitive and really to give them a competitive edge?
Right. So Calvin, my first company, Blue Beacon Consulting, we played in the Fed civilian space since October 2004 when I first created that company. Now I purchased Sierra in December 2019, so now I have a couple of years under my belt in terms of Department of Defense, U.S. Navy contracts. At the end of the day, the process is the same. It's relationships, it's customer knowledge, and one thing that you don't have in a commercial world is when you're spending tax dollars, there is a need for federal transparency to give the small Blue Beacons and the small Sierras of the world the intel that a marketing or a business development arm of Northrop Grumman or Booz Allen would have, type of thing. They want to have an even playing field. So there's no need for marketing per se, but there's need for market intelligence. Totally different concept. And so to your point, looking at where, if agency X has a long range forecast and they have 5 IT contracts or 5 project management contracts coming on the next fiscal year, and agency Y has 25, go with the 25, right? Because there's going to be some churn and burn. There's the bell curve. Yeah, they're going to have their favorite sons that they always do business with, but there's going to be some people on the back end, some companies on the back end that are underperforming, that low bid some work to win, didn't have their story correct, didn't do well on execution, and they're fading out. And then there's that big sweet spot in the middle that if you have the right relationships, you have a good teaming partner, you have a good resource, you have a good story to tell, you have good CPARS, past performance, you might win some work, right? So there's a lot to play there. So to answer your question more specifically, the structure is the same. It starts with relationships. It starts with market intel. It starts with understanding what are the buying needs, the consuming needs. What is the demand of which you're trying to supply your talents to at a federal agency? Look across the board. I would even add a layer. Like I said, I've raised 3 kids now to 21, 24 years old, 21 years old, twins and so forth. And human behavior doesn't change. An agency's branding, reputation doesn't change. Some people look at an agency that's woefully underperforming on the president's dashboards of small business set-asides, quotas, and so forth, and they look at, oh, they're underperforming. They're going to want me. I look at the other way. I look at it and say, I'm not special. If they haven't done this for the past 5 years to worry about putting a priority, small business needs, or investing in small business community, reaching out to have a small business set aside and so forth, they're not going to do that for me. So why should I bang my head up that wall? I'd rather go to the agencies like a Department of Ed that has proven time and time again, stood the test of time. So it's institutionalized, it's institutionalized knowledge. It's not just one person with a passion for small business like yourself and Gabrielle and so forth, but it's the department level that has that, and say, okay, Department of Ed, they have a history of being friendly and encouraging small business at all economic levels. They have enough traffic, enough projects, enough contracts that they can give a lot of work to a lot of different diverse audiences and so forth. That's where I target. So again, the same process where I get to intel, get the knowledge, understand who's buying, understand if they're buying that matches my company's capabilities statement, past performance statement, resume statements, and so forth, right? But then I marry in to say, okay, what is it that they're doing to show that they're doing something, that they're committed to something beyond me? Now I can have that conversation. And if I have relationships, that's where I go. I go where I have relationships most, first and foremost.
Fantastic. And Jeff, thank you for this information. I mean, this was, I was feverishly writing down notes. I think this information is invaluable, right? You're giving a master class for other small businesses to really learn about federal contracting. And I really, really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your effort. I really appreciate your contribution to this ecosystem, right? Because what you're doing is giving back, and I really appreciate it. I know the small businesses appreciate it. So thank you very much.
You know what, Calvin? This has been a pleasure for me. For all of you guys out there, I was in your chair at various levels, and I don't care what chair you're in, whether it's a first-year chair or a 10 years in chair or anything in between. I've been in all your seats, and I'm probably still in your seat now. I just have a little bit more knowledge ahead of you in terms of some experiences. But at the end of the day, it's a grind. I used to tell my people, price aggressively, because not one contract we're going to be going off to Tahiti with and making it rich. So price aggressive, win to work, and just be successful over time. But it starts with, you got to give your audience, you got to give your customer respect of what? Knowledge. I said it in the last one, I say it again. It's human nature. You take a class picture, you take a group shot. What's the very first thing people look for in that picture? They look for themselves. So if I'm going to have a conversation with Calvin, I better know a little bit about Calvin and be prepared to talk about Calvin's problems and not talk about my problems.
That's it.
So I'm happy to help any way I can.
Fantastic. Gabby, are you still there? Gabby.
Oh, now you see me. Okay. Yes, I want to say thank you to both of you very much. I mean, as you might have seen in the comments section, we're getting a lot of great feedback. I do want to let everyone know that we do try to host these every other month. So if you are interested in hearing more, definitely keep an eye out, register in our SBCX database, and you'll get notified when we're having the next one. Yeah, this has been awesome. And hopefully we will have this out in a few weeks. The recording should be available online. And you two have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Everyone have a good holidays if I don't talk to you.
Happy holidays. And Jeff, I owe you a coffee.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.